Hello, George Freestone, back to tell you the story about our visit to see the Toronto Blue Jays play the Minnesota Twins, and the TC stands for Twin Cities. Took me a minute to figure that one out a while back, but I thought I'd share that as well with you. This trip is one that we took in August of 2015. We drove from our home in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, north to upstate New York. We stopped off in Corning for some attractions and to see some friends. From Corning, we then drove further north, crossed into Canada near Buffalo. And in Toronto, we saw many attractions of the city as well as the game. From there, we then moved on and drove through Canada to Windsor and crossed over to Detroit and saw the Tigers at Comerica. And that's our next stop that we'll talk about shortly. But what I'd like to talk about next is my background. You can see that it looks like hotel rooms. Well, this is actually looking at the outfield from within Rogers Center. These are rooms from the hotel that we stayed in, which was at the time the Renaissance in Toronto. I think it's still a Marriott property, but I believe it's changed its name. And these rooms have a good view, not, of course, as good as you might have if you were near the infield, but an outfield view of the game. And so the people in these rooms were enjoying the game just as we were enjoying it from off first base. I saw something that a New York Times reporter had written about these rooms and called it a room with a view. So the view isn't spectacular. You can get much better views by getting a little closer to the action, but still, it's a rather unique aspect of Rogers Center. And with that, I'm going to switch to the slide and we'll start talking about our visit to Toronto. And what I'm going to do first is move me to an area of the slide that might not encumber us talking about some of these pictures. Okay, I've talked about the trip, and that's this first bullet right here. And I do want to point out that in the PDF rendition of the slides that is on Dropbox, you can click on these links and they will take you to albums here of, for example, our visit to Toronto and to the game. I think there's more than 400 photos in that particular album. I mentioned that we stopped off in Corning. Well, we had a meal in nearby Hammondsport. I think this was the restaurant, the Shield from the restaurant. And these were our friends from Air Products with my wife and I in that particular shot as well after a good meal. So that's the first bullet here. I think the second thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is the game. So I'm going to skip down, and again, these are all active box score links. So you can go to, by clicking on this in the PDF rendition, you can actually go to the game. This is a game I think that we saw with the fewest number of hits. I'm not 100%, but there was only a total of 9 hits. The Twins, unfortunately, only had 2 hits and 1 run, and the Blue Jays won with 3 runs and 7 hits. And the winning pitcher was this fellow right here, Estrada. And as this particular bullet says, he won the game in the 9th inning. He won his 9th victory, right, with this game. In addition to a few pictures of the game here, I have a picture of the mascot for the Blue Jays, who's named Ace, and not surprisingly, is a Blue Jay. Okay, I do want to talk for a moment about one of the players for the Blue Jays at the time that we visited, that being R.A. Dickey. And here's a book that R.A. has written. Here's a banner that was outside the ballpark. And just for a moment, I want to go here and show you what's on the back of my jersey. Again, if I stood up, the image wouldn't be quite so good, but what's on the back is R.A. Dickey's number. And the reason why I invested in this particular jersey while we were at Rogers Center is R.A. used to be a New York Met. And so with that, we'll go back to the Rogers Center. And I got to move me again because I need, yep, and I got to move me again. There we go. So that's what's on my jersey. But let me talk a little bit further about R.A. Dickey, who had a very interesting life. I learned more about it by actually reading this book. He suffered some abuse as a child, and as he grew up, he also was a flawed individual like lots of other people. He's made some mistakes and he owned up to them. And what I want to focus on is a little bit about his baseball history. R.A. Dickey was drafted in the first round in 1996 with the Texas Rangers, and he got a very generous signing bonus of $810,000 that was contingent on him successfully passing a physical. Well, during that, what he thought was going to be a routine physical, what they saw was a problem with his elbow. It wasn't as they would have expected it. And so the Rangers rescinded their signing bonus and offer. And R.A. Dickey had to deal with that disappointment, but he still came back and was a successful pitcher. Now, I know him most from his years with the Mets, and in one year, in 2012, his pitching record was 20-6. He won the Cy Young Award that year. The book talks about his struggles becoming a knuckleballer because he didn't start out to be a knuckleballer. That was his contingency plan because he didn't have quite the velocity and the movement on his pitches that he would like. So he taught himself to be a knuckleballer. He spent time with Phil Niekro, but in 2012 with the Mets, he won the Cy Young Award. So a very significant and positive career. And this book actually is a very interesting story about an interesting guy. Let's see if I can't talk just a little bit more about the ballpark, the Rogers Center as well. Right next to the book here is a series of gargoyle-like statues. They're actually fans. You can see the woman in the top left or whatever pointing to something. There's a guy eating a hot dog there too. There are 7 fans in this collection, and that they're actually on the side of Rogers Center from the outside of the ballpark. There are a total, I think, of 15 fans in a couple areas around the ballpark. And the interesting thing is they were put there by an artist from Toronto, the Toronto area, Michael Snow. And Michael Snow also was responsible for the artwork that you see here, the Canadian geese, that's at Eaton Center, which is a downtown mall in beautiful downtown Toronto. So I'm going to skip around a little bit too, because I really didn't do justice to this second bullet. In this second bullet, I mentioned that while we were in Corning, we visited the Corning Museum of Glass. And so we did that in 2015. My wife, Carol, and I also visited the Corning Museum of Glass, I think in 1979, many years prior. And so it's something that we wanted to go back and enjoy a second time. And when we did, we saw this Chihuly glass. And what's interesting about that is there is a Chihuly glass garden and display in Seattle that we ran into while we were there as well. We saw them actually blowing glass. We had a wonderful stay back at Corning Museum of Glass when we were in Corning. The other thing that we saw there was at the Rockwell Museum. And what I've highlighted here are some of Frederic Remington's images from the West of riders on horses in very interesting poses. And you can see just one of them here. But we had a very enjoyable stay in Corning. That's where we were with the Dubs, our friends from Air Products, and we also saw a couple of very nice attractions. While we were in Toronto, we saw some very interesting things too. I think we saw here the Renaissance. That's where we stayed. And one of the things that we did, and I'm going to switch now to talking about the Hard Rock cafes, because one of the mornings that we were there, we had the breakfast in the hotel restaurant, which used to be the second Hard Rock Cafe at the back of the Sky Dome, which was the name of the Rogers Center before it was named the Rogers Center. And while we were at breakfast in the Renaissance restaurant, used to be the Hard Rock Cafe, we took this picture of the field. So just like the image behind me here, we were in a restaurant that had a view of the field as well. And this was a group of young people who were learning baseball skills at the morning that we were having breakfast. And Toronto is a beautiful city, but to finish this particular bullet, the other Hard Rock Cafe, which is downtown, and the one in the back of the Sky Dome is no longer. It's been converted to the hotel restaurant. But this Hard Rock Cafe downtown was the first Hard Rock Cafe in North America. Hard Rock Cafes, of course, started in London. A couple of Americans decided they wanted to try and bring some American fare to that city, and they did, and the chain has kind of taken off from there. But this was the first Hard Rock Cafe in North America in beautiful downtown Toronto. Other things that we did while we were in Toronto is we went to the Museum of Art in Toronto, and you'll find the pictures from that in this link right there. It was very enjoyable as well. You can see a picture of my wife enjoying some of the artwork here. This piece of sculpture, I think, is from there, as well as this particular painting. Now, I'm a railroad buff. I enjoy trains. I used to ride on trains with my parents to various cities. But right at the CN Tower, which is the Canadian National Tower, right there in downtown Toronto, right on the lake, and also incidentally right next to both Rogers Center and the Renaissance Hotel. And you can see some of the gargoyles that I described up here, right there. on the side of Rogers Center as well. But the the hotel is really at a convenient place to enjoy many of the things that the city has to offer. And one of them was that Museum of Art. The next one was the Railroad Museum that is right there at the base of the Canadian National Tower. And this very large Canadian National engine is indeed on the roundhouse that was at the base and part of that overall museum. So that was very enjoyable as well. Okay, I've talked about, I think, everything here with the exception maybe of this picture right here. Maybe I've skipped over one or two, like the backdrop on the signage within the stadium, some of the great food that we had to eat as well. But this building, for those of you who have been in New York City, of course, you will appreciate the Flatiron Building resemblance to this building in Toronto. This is also referred to as the Flatiron Building, but I think its official name is Guggenheim, and it's a series of offices, and I made it a slightly different rendition to maybe draw out the reds a little bit more as well. So quite an enjoyable visit to Toronto, a chance for me to celebrate my appreciation of Met R.A. Dickey, who at that time was a Blue Jay. So we will leave you now as we conclude our story about Toronto and look forward to talking with you next about Detroit. So thanks for your attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode.